The red light has not come on. Okay, yeah, we're good. Yeah. And if everyone could keep their microphones on mute, please. Once Nicola and I have presented, we will open the floor to questions. And if you'd prefer to put your questions in the chat, please do so as you go along as well. Okay, over to Nicola, I think, please. Tell us all about the Suffolk Digital Inclusion Fund. Thank you, Nicola.
Thank you, Jess. Hi, everyone. It's nice to see some faces that I know. I think it's nice. It's there are quite a lot of you, and I've offered to come in and sort of host the first part of this webinar, just to give everyone who's attended the opportunity to find out a bit more about the work that we're doing to support digital inclusion, and to give you all a bit of a background around the fund and some of the objectives, so that hopefully when you apply for it, you'll be aware of the types of things that we're hoping to support. So I'm going to present my presentation. Present my presentation, of course. Sorry, I'm just going to use PowerPoint Live, and I'm hoping that it works for you guys, because normally I don't. Normally I just, share my screen, but I'm hoping. Jess, can you just confirm to me that you can see this and that you can see it on a large screen?
It looks like it's loading, so bear with. Yes, I can see it on a large screen. Yeah.
Fabulous, and I did get a thumbs up as well, so that's great. So yeah, so obviously I, as we've mentioned, sit in Suffolk County Council. I sit in the Public Health and Communities Directorate in Suffolk County Council, but the work that we've been doing and the work that we've established around digital inclusion actually sits across all of the council. And the background for the money and for the rationale behind this fund actually came out of some recommendations that were developed as part of a 7-month digital inclusion policy development panel. So we had lots of sessions where we had probably some of you guys come along. We had VCFSE representation, we had skills team representation, we had lots of external people like Tech East and some of our experts who we work with more widely come and sit as part of that policy development panel. And it was run by our councillors, who then decided to allocate some money to some key strands to support our residents to access services more safely online. We're very aware that there, is a lot of movement of services to into that online space. We're aware that they're not moving exclusively, so we are moving into a digital first space, but not a digital only space. But we want to make sure that we're bringing our residents along with us into that space. And one of the ways to do that is to work with people who are out in the community, who are already assets, to help to tackle some of the challenges that we're going to face in doing that, because we're aware that, there are lots of challenges in doing that. So part of my role is to work across digital inclusion in public health and communities, but I do work very closely with our customer services team. I sit on some of our internal panels and also host our digital inclusion network, which is co-chaired with East Suffolk Council, who've also contributed into this fund, and also operates across other districts and boroughs, some of the larger VCFSE organisations, and some of our health partners. So it really is a partnership piece of work. But someone else is taking control of my presentation. I'm going to take it back, whoever that was. I do apologise. So yeah, as I was saying, what we want to do is to maximise the work that's already going on out in communities and try to support that, to support the move, that we're seeing across all sorts of public sectors. So not just the council, but also the health services, and also working with the police to help us to do that. So I want to just run you through some of the background of the fund and our aims and objectives, and some of the data that we've spent time working on to ensure that we're, looking in the right direction. But we're very much aware that this is a partnership piece, and that it's you guys, that we need to facilitate to do this work for us. So our key aim for the fund, and also for pretty much all of the work that we're starting to do with the network and with some of our other groups, is to start to try to identify if there are areas of digital poverty, start to try to reduce digital poverty, start to try to increase digital inclusion for our residents as our services start to move more into that digital space, and start to try to identify what those needs of our residents are and what the appropriate solutions for those residents are. So the key areas of focus, and these are not the only areas, but they are key areas of focus. So we're very keen to ensure that we're improving digital skills, capability to be able to use the services. We're aware that there's a motivation piece around that, and that for some people, you know, it's not necessarily about being digitally upskilled, but it's about the practical application of that. So some of our older residents, my mum obviously is not an older resident because she lives in Scotland, but you know, my mum has really got no interest in being online unless it's to FaceTime her grandchildren. So, you know, if we can take what the, you know, where we are at currently in terms of level of skill and start to move slowly into what is appropriate for our residents. So we're not talking about, you know, GCSE or A-level digital skills. We're talking about reaching people to feel more confident in using their smartphone effectively, or working with people who may be able to take a picture on a smartphone but don't know how to share it, or people who are concerned about all of the safety and security around the use of some of the devices that they may come across. So digital skills is very widely about the capability and the motivation that people have in order to move into that space. Can I just make sure that people are all muted, because I am getting a bit of background noise? Another area of focus would be about offering the right and appropriate device access. So we're aware, you know, for example, around some school children, and I used to be a school teacher, that they might fall into being digitally included because they've got a smartphone, but a smartphone's really difficult to do homework on. And actually, it's about moving into the space where they've got the appropriate device for their needs, and that it's affordable and that it is sustainable and usable for them. So devices is part of the offer potentially. And also, we're currently working with a national organisation called Good Things Foundation, who I'm sure some of you will be aware of, who offer SIM cards. There are quite a few restrictions and regulations around that, but we're aware, particularly as we move further into the cost of living issues that we've been facing for a while, that affordability is an issue, and that the right kind of affordability, again, is an issue. You know, we're aware that people who claim universal credit are 6 times more likely to be cut off from broadband than people who are not claiming universal credit. And we're also aware through the discussions with groups like Healthwatch Suffolk that some people don't even qualify for universal credit, so they don't, you know, they don't actually even fall into that area. Or we've got immigrant populations who don't qualify for universal credit and are completely excluded. So we're aware that there's some, you know, there are significant issues around accessibility. So obviously, because I sit in public health, some of the work that I've been doing is looking at the national data around the impacts of digital exclusion, and a lot of these will sit across issues that you will be seeing across the board, I guess. You know, they have a huge impact on some of the wider health inequalities. And actually, the mapping that we've done is very strikingly. I do apologise if you can hear my dog barking. I knew that was going to happen. They do fit very strikingly in line with the other health inequality mapping that we see. So, you know, the groups that are more likely to suffer from digital exclusion are also probably suffering already from multiple health deprivations. So we are likely, with people who are excluded, that they are less likely to access services, that they'll experience poorer health outcomes and a lower life expectancy. They will be more socially isolated. So one of the key statistics that is nationally available is that if you have basic skill levels, you're 14% more you're likely to connect with friends, family and community 14% more frequently. So that could make a real difference. One of the other areas that we're looking at is that obviously we want to have economic growth and we want our populations to move into the right type of employment and education. So it gives more access to jobs and education. Something that we're constantly looking at is the difference between, you know, how affordable life is at the moment, and if you're buying everything face to face rather than online, you are likely to face a premium in terms of your shopping. So shopping is about 13% more expensive if you're not doing it online, which leads to further financial exclusion. And obviously a lot of people are not comfortable banking online, and that is another key issue for them as we start to see bank closures. So all of these I'm sure you're familiar with, and I did want to move on to some of the Suffolk data that we've done some work around. So although Suffolk is not one of the areas of most significant digital poverty, we do still see digital poverty. Around 10% of the residents across the whole of the east of England are completely digitally excluded, so they are not using the internet at all. Around 20% of our residents in Suffolk suffer from some level of digital exclusion, so they don't have all of the basic digital skills that they would need to access all of the services that I've just been talking about, to do the shopping, to access education, to access banking, to feel comfortable with communicating safely online. Those on our lowest incomes are the least likely to be fully engaged online. They are also the least likely of our populations to access sources of information and services online, and they're probably the groups of people that we want to reach most. And I think that's really striking, is that, you know, the people that we most need will be the people that are the least likely to be engaged. So we're very keen to focus down and really target any interventions and see the impact that those interventions will have, that we fund through this fund. As I said earlier, residents who are on lower incomes or who claim universal credit are much more likely to, for example, not have broadband or not have effective broadband. They're also more likely not to have the appropriate devices, and they may be less skilled and less confident online. So actually, although I said that we have those three key areas of focus, you know, we want to bear in mind about motivation, but we also want to bear in mind that any intervention that sits across all three of those key areas of focus will probably be the most impactful, and they would be the ones that we would, you know, really like to be hearing about and supporting. And the other thing that I'm sure that you guys are working across is that we do have a higher than national average of residents over the age of 65, and they are the most likely to suffer from lack of motivation across some of the changes in technology, and therefore they're the most likely to suffer from issues as we move forward. You know, I'm in my 50s, and there is some tech that I'm not interested in already. So, you know, I do think, what are we going to be facing as tech continues to improve and to change our lifestyles? So here's our heat map. This presentation will go out to anybody who wants to see it, because obviously it will hopefully inform some of the work that we do, so that you can have a proper look at this. But just to run you through the kind of highlights of this, the darker the blue area, the more likely the person, the community rather, is to suffer from digital exclusion caused by the key factors that are nationally known and identified to impact on digital exclusion. So the key factors that we've identified, and I will just say that this does not include broadband. Broadband has been factored out of this map because broadband we're approaching separately. We've got national investment coming through around full fibre broadband in rural areas. And so although some of the district councils are doing some work around broadband, it's not specifically something that this fund will target. So we're looking at the other key factors that will impact across digital exclusion. So on this map, we've got older age, lower income, disability and sensory impairment, lower skill levels and higher levels of unemployment. So we're aware that people who are furthest from the labour market, for example, for whatever reason, are most likely to be part of our digitally excluded groups. You can see that this is broken down into the kind of local areas, and I've done quite a bit of work around getting some more detail around this, but you'll see that we've got rural impacts, but we've got significant pockets of digital exclusion in all of our major urban areas as well. So, hopefully that'll be of interest to you. And as I said, the darker the blue, the more likely we are to have populations that are digitally excluded there. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry if you can hear my dog barking. I don't know if it's just me that she's really disturbing, but if you can, she's being very loud and she's not normally that loud. So I do apologise if you can't hear her. All right, next slide. There we go. So this is a slide that was put together by a colleague of mine. It's sourced from several different national pieces of data and research, and I'm sure that that this will be something that you're familiar with. So the more we can bring our populations into feeling and being able to afford to be digitally included, the more they have the skills and the devices and the accessibility, the more likely they are to fall into categories that really hit several of our objectives, both in public health and in Suffolk County Council more widely, and I'm sure across some of the pieces of work that you do. So I think that this is just, I've put this in to help to reinforce some of the benefits that, if you feel digitally included, if you have the skills, you're much more likely to take your education forward, to improve your chances of moving into higher level jobs, higher paid jobs, to be able to access the different sources of information and education that we have. But really, it's incredibly empowering for some of our more marginalised communities, and that's really where we want the focus to be. We want to be looking at economic growth through empowering our populations to empower themselves, to be able to access services, to be able to access support, to be able to access information. And we're hoping that will hit several targets, and I'm sure that lots of you will be working to achieve some of these goals within your organisations. So a little bit more about our target demographic, because I guess that's what you're going to want to be looking at in any applications. So the work that we've done in the past, and it's not excluded, so I do want to highlight that we are focusing on residents who fall into that older category as well. But that has, during the pandemic, both for the county council and for some of our district partners, the older demographic was one of the core demographics. So what we want to do with this fund is to extend our reach, to still include our older populations, but not necessarily focus just on those older populations. So the key demographics that we're looking at, which will cut across age as well, are residents who are on lower incomes. So we're aware that 40% of benefit claimants are have very low digital engagement, so are almost completely digitally excluded. And around a third of people who are unemployed have very low digital engagement. If we can move those people into being able to access services and information more effectively, we're hoping that we can improve their life chances. We're also aware that people who are earning less than £17,500 are significantly less likely to have foundation level digital skills. So obviously there's a bit of a chicken and egg here, but we're hoping that if we can improve the skills of people in that income category, we can start to bring them into those higher income level earning brackets. We're aware that people who are living with disability and sensory impairment are much more likely to be digitally excluded. So around a quarter of people who have sensory impairment do not use the internet, even though there are significant accessibility tools out there. And some of the work that I've done across our Digital Champions programme with Communities Together East Anglia has sat across working with the Royal National Institute for the Blind to start to look at tools, but also offer that face-to-face connection for people who have visual impairment. So we are aware around the sensory impairment. What I mean by that is more the physical sensory impairment, so hearing loss, sight loss. One of the things that have come out of this, and a question that I've been asked a couple of times, is that people who are neurodivergent on the whole tend not to fall into the digitally excluded category. They tend to be more likely to prefer to communicate online, but we are aware that that is not a blanket, catch-all for everybody who faces neurodiversity. They tend to be more highly represented in having tech skills and in having access, according to the statistics, to tech and to digital platforms. But that is by no means to say that they will all fall into that category. So neurodivergence isn't named on there, but and I think we do need to be careful about, classing people with neurodivergence as digitally excluded, because statistically they tend not to be. But certainly a lot of people with neurodivergence will fall across having some other form of disability or sensory impairment. So hopefully that answers that question. Residents who have lower levels of formal qualification of formal qualifications, or who sit in the lower social grades. So these were defined by the Lloyds Bank Consumer Digital Index as lower social grades, and they are much more likely to be digitally excluded. And you can see that a significant proportion of our digitally excluded group will fall into what would be classed as the lower socioeconomic grades of C2, D and E. Compared to the number of people who actually sit in those across the population, I think we only have 5% of our population in Suffolk who we would class as digitally excluded, who sit in the higher socioeconomic grades. So it's definitely an area that we would like to target alongside people who are more likely to be suffering from higher levels of unemployment. So I just want to come back really to those aims and objectives. These will be the core of what we're asking from applications. We want to see projects that are improving digital skills, that are looking at the right type of device and connectivity for our residents, that are looking at supporting accessibility and improving cost effectiveness, reducing cost for our residents. But a project that sits across all of that and also thinks about levels of motivation would also be useful. So have a think about all of the work that you're doing across those when you're looking at the application. And, we have got work going on around this area already. So I did want to just give you some examples of some of the types of initiatives that have proved effective, and also that we would like to support, just to give you an idea of whether you feel that your project, would fit within the kind of criteria that we're looking at. So we're not saying with any of this that we want something new and innovative. It's fine if you have an existing project that covers the work that, in the target areas that we're looking at. But alternatively, we are quite happy with new projects. What we would like is that we're using the assets that are already out there. We're using groups that are already working with our populations, that have those connections with our populations, and we are supporting you to develop your work. We're supporting you to sustain your work. So it's really important to us that we are sustainable, that this fund, working with partners, will be a long-term fund, that we will offer and Jess will talk about this later, that we will offer funding over, longer periods of time rather than one-off funding. We're really keen that this meets the needs of our existing assets and of our residents. So the types of things that you might be involved in that we would like to support might be some form of provision of hardware to target groups. We would be looking at evidence of sustainability around that. So we're aware as a council that we directly have provided laptops in the past to some of our vulnerable populations. We're aware that, you know, significantly those have not necessarily been used in the way that we would want them to be used or in a sustainable fashion. So I think that what we're looking at here is working with groups to say, actually, we can, you know, we can work with our populations to upskill them to use this device effectively, and we can give them that face-to-face contact that they can start to do it in a long-term way. So again, we're working with a group out in the community and with one of our training providers to offer tablets and training to people, and they then keep the tablet, but they also can potentially sign up to some digital champion workshops to help support them into the long term. So it's not about giving people hardware. We would want to see that there is some kind of approach to working with people to make sure they're maximising the use of the hardware and that it is really supporting them in the way that we would want. We would be happy to support targeted digital skills provision. So currently we've got a digital champions programme where we're working with some of our vulnerable population to help them to move into that digital space. So this is not about supporting people to get, you know, a level 2 or 3 qualification around digital skills. This is about really getting them to develop their foundation level digital skills and feel more confident with the technology and with the services that are now online. We'd be really happy to work with organisations who already are doing digital inclusion work or already linked in to digital inclusion programmes. So we have the Good Things Foundation, which is a national charity that sits in our digital inclusion network, and they already offer SIM cards and data to residents. So if you're already doing that and you would like a bit of extra support to access devices, again, that would be the kind of thing that we would really like to hear about. We're looking particularly at working with some of our target marginalised groups, and that will be different for each of our partners who are putting in funding. So certainly as Suffolk County Council, you know, we're doing work with the Homes for Ukraine programme. We're doing work across immigrant programmes. We've picked up Healthwatch Suffolk guidelines in terms of some of the digital work that we do. So we're very keen to reach the marginalised groups that we don't directly work with as well, to help support them to move into that digital space. We do want to offer significant amounts of money. We do want this to make a tangible difference. So again, this is something that Jess will come on to later, and I'm happy to take questions around later. But we're also hoping that some small scale local projects that have existing links into their communities will think about how they can move into this space and how they can access significant amounts of funding to help them to do this. So, you know, we don't want to exclude small scale local projects. Absolutely, we want to support them, but we would also be happy to support you know, groups of projects that might want to work together to extend the reach across wider areas. I'm about to go and throw my dog out into the back garden because that's me finished, and I know that Jess is going to come in now, and there'll be time for questions later. So as I said, you'll all get an opportunity to see that and to have that presentation, but I'm going to hand back to Jess now, possibly go off screen and open the back door and throw my dog out.
Thank you, Nicola. That's brilliant. It was great to hear more about the fund. I'm just going to get my presentation up now. Bear with me. Can you see it? Kind of disappeared for me. Hang on a second. Can you see
your screen sharing, Jess, but it's quite small at the moment. So if you go up to slideshow, if you go up to the slideshow button at the top,
yeah,
and you should be able to go from beginning.
Oh no.
Is it going to let you click on the slide? Yeah, up there. Now, if you click on that,
Yeah,
there's nothing happening.
oh, from the side. Yeah, here we go. Here we go.
That's it.
Because I've been because I'm working on two screens, because I thought visibility wise it would be easier, and now it's confused me. Sorry about that. So let's talk about the application process and how that's going to work for the Digital Inclusion Fund. So many of you will have applied to the Suffolk Community Foundation before, so you may already know this, so apologies if you do, but for those of you that don't, I'm just going to give you a brief overview of what we need from you in the application process. So to apply for funding from the foundation, you'll need to provide the list of things that you see here, and we will be able to share these slides with you afterwards, but you'll find all this information also on our website. Constitution, governing document, articles of association, document, a current equality, diversity and inclusion policy, a safeguarding policy, and that's not just for organisations who only deal with children, but that's for all organisations, whether you deal with children or adults or both. Your most recent end of year accounts, and you must have a bank account in the organisation's name, requiring 2 signatories for all transactions. So what happens at the assessment and decision-making process? When we receive your application, one of our grants officers will complete the relevant due diligence checks and write an assessment on your application. And we may well need to get in touch with you at this point to ask for a little bit more information. All the assessments will be sent to the Fund's independent grant panel, who will consider each application and decide whether or not to award a grant. The reasons for rejection, there's a little list here, but things like might not meet the fund's criteria, which is why it's really important to double check that before you apply. The fund may well be oversubscribed. You may not have demonstrated the need for your project as much as you could have. You may have high levels of reserves, etc. So the Digital Inclusion Fund will open on our website from tomorrow. At this stage, we are asking for expressions of interest only. I'll go on to the details of that a little bit later, but that's just so that you know the expression of interest form is very brief. We don't need a huge amount of information at expression of interest stage, so it shouldn't take you too long to complete. Who can apply for this funding? There's a list here: charitable and voluntary groups, faith and community groups, social enterprises, parish, community and town councils. And what sort of things can be funded? Nicola has touched on some ideas that you might have, but new projects, existing projects, revenue and capital costs, or a mixture, and some core costs and overheads also. So our top tips: please read and reread the guidance and criteria. Make sure that you have all the supporting documents you need to meet our criteria. On your expression of interest form, please explain clearly what you would like to do if you were awarded funding, how you intend to do that, and who the beneficiaries would be of your project. And please try to explain how your activity will fit with the aims of the Digital Inclusion Fund. And know your costs, please. Have a clear idea of how much your total project will cost, and provide us with a breakdown. So what happens next? As I said, expressions of interest will open on our website from tomorrow, and they will be open until the 8th of December. As I previously said, it is quite a short form and shouldn't take too long to complete. Successful applicants will be invited to submit a full application in early January 2024, and funding decisions will be made on a quarterly basis from the end of January. The fund is a rolling programme which will be in place until funds are exhausted. That just leaves me to say thank you for your time today. If you have any questions at all about this fund, about the application process, or whether your project is right for this fund, please do get in touch, and I'll be happy to help. So let's open the floor to questions. Let me just... Yeah, oh, I've really messed myself up here with this slideshow. Bear with me.
Jess, can I just ask if we can move to the expression of interest slide?
Yeah. Yeah.
Before we answer the questions, right, I think it might be the one before that, the one that kind of outlined what would be in. Oh, was there some? Did I miss the bit about what would be in it? What would be expected to be in the expression of interest?
No, we have. There's no. I didn't have a slide on that, Nicola, but we did have a slide that said, yeah, clearly explain what you want to do, how you intend to do it, and who the beneficiaries will be, and how your planned activity fits with the criteria of the fund that you will be able to find on our website. We literally have, there's literally a couple of boxes on the expression of interest form in order to complete and just give us a really brief overview of what your intended project would look like and who it would benefit and how.
And if I can just come in at that point, and I know that you've got colleagues with you in the room as well, Jess, and we've also got Paul Henry from our external funding team. But we're very keen that we have that expression of interest stage, because we want to make the process really as straightforward as possible. So what we don't want to do, we're very aware, having worked as part of the VCFSE Resilience Charter groups, that that the voluntary sector is incredibly stretched, and what we don't want to do is to put too much more in the way of obstacles for you all in terms of this. Yeah. So the expression of interest stage has really been something that's come out of that discussion with the voluntary sector, that, if we can put in that step as a stage that you can ask us questions and we can come back to you just for a bit of clarification, it then reduces the impact of having to complete any major grant funding applications. But we are also conscious that we want this to remain relatively light touch. So the grant funding process itself is not significantly onerous. We've got Paul here, Jess and I have all worked on various grant funding programs in the past, and we're keen that we keep it, relatively light touch. Obviously, it'll be proportionate to the amount of money that is awarded, but we are hoping that it will, remain relatively light touch. So if I can come back on a couple of questions in the chat, because there are a couple. An idea of how much the grants will be. So we are looking at figures of around about £25,000, but we want to be flexible on this. So it's much more for us about the outcomes and the impact of the project. So, we're not saying that we don't want small amounts of grant application coming through, but we are saying that we want the impact to be significant. So initially, we were looking at around about an envelope of around about £25,000. But Jo, I hope this doesn't make it harder, but there is actually no real restriction on the maximum or minimum funding envelope. So, it's going to be around about £25,000, but it doesn't, there is no, there's no set minimum or maximum in there, because we want it to be about meeting the needs of our populations. I'm just conscious that Jo seems to be chatting away to someone in the background now, even though I'm answering her question. So it may be that I come back to that on that later. And also, can I just say, in terms of the, you did mention, Jess, that it's a rolling programme, but there is a deadline in terms of expression of interest, and also on the panel, because we're going to have a panel that will look at the applications and assess them and see how they meet the needs. So obviously, we have to have timelines put in place so that we can meet them. So it's not rolling in terms of, there will be somebody looking at these applications on an ongoing basis throughout the year. It's rolling in the sense that we're going to have quarterly panel meetings and quarterly calls to apply for the grants, but that we want the programme, because we're seeking fund. We, as an organisation, and Suffolk Community Foundation are seeking ongoing funding to bolster this. So it will be rolling in terms of, there is no end date for this particularly. We're going to want it to be applied for and assessed on a quarterly basis, but actually we're hoping that it will become an ongoing digital fund, you know, for the foreseeable future, really. So that's what moves like that. So hopefully I've answered those questions. If not, I've noticed that Joe's just come back to us now. There, and I was just saying there is no minimum maximum funding envelope. We're looking at allocating around £25,000 a quarter. So if it's a significant project, it would be, you know, an application of £25,000 would be fine. If it was a really significant impact, we would look at extending that, you know, beyond the £25,000. So we're not excluding applications that are above that £25,000 if it's a significant project, because we have already got some extra funding on board to extend the programme beyond the initial period that we were hoping for. But also, we don't have a minimum envelope because we're aware that, you know, although we want it to be a sustainable impact, it could be a sustainable impact for a small number of people. So again, all applications will be considered. Am I allowed to say that, Jess? Paul's going to pick me up on this now and probably tell me off, but that's the rationale behind the fund. Paul?
I was just going to ask a question that might come up if people look on the Community Foundation webpage, because I know there's obviously already some information on there about the fund, and it talks about target areas. So the question I wanted to ask, just to make sure for sort of clarity, was will applications outside those target areas be considered as well?
Yeah, I mean, the target areas, as I said earlier, you know, we have got we've got target populations, definitely. We've got the heat map. So what we're aiming to do is to ensure that we're reaching the right people. We want to reach them around skills, devices, affordability, but we are aware that motivation is something, you know, that might have an impact. So yeah, I mean, those would be the key areas that we would want to see the evidence of outcome. And I know that the foundation and the application process will go into a bit more detail on that when we get to that stage. The application form will have questions around those. But, you know, the point is that we want to bring people into our, you know, into that digital space. And so any evidence that will help us to reach those people, particularly the target vulnerable groups in target areas, would be great. So, you know, to be top of the list, you know, it would be in a dark blue area covering those people, you know, that fall into significant vulnerabilities, and it would cover skills, accessibility and devices. But, you know, we're aware that not all projects are going to do that. So it's anyone that will fall into those categories would be considered.
Nicola, there's some questions in the chat. If you don't mind if I read one out to you. Is there the possibility of continuation funding into a further year?
Yes, that was something that we've all said yes to. If it's an impactful project, absolutely.
And about outcomes and how we will measure outcomes.
So we have got a specification that went over to that we put together in conjunction with our external funding team. So Paul was involved in that. Some of Jess's colleagues over at the Suffolk Community Foundation were involved in that. So the outcomes in that document are quite clear, and they will be they'll be put into the application form itself. We'll be doing a sift through expressions of interest, and what I would say is if you're applying with an expression of interest, that you kind of look at your vulnerable populations, look at the target areas, look at the types of projects, you know, that I've given examples of, look at the, you know, does it fall into skills, motivation, accessibility, affordability type of thing, then, you know, definitely we would consider it, and then you'll get a bit more information around the outcomes at the time. But outcomes are about bringing people into the space. I mean, ideally, we would be looking at people improving qualifications and getting jobs and all of that kind of, but they're much longer term. So really, it's about evidencing that you are working with those people and that you have got, you know, that you can evidence that you have had outcomes with those groups before, that you're aware that, you know, adding some kind of digital element will help, you know, to improve the outcomes for those people. So hopefully that's answered that.
Thank you, Nicola. And then we have a question from Ben, please.
Thanks, Jess. Thank you, Nicola, as well. Yeah, just a question on, is this project, or thinking about digital inclusion, is it only a positive thing for everyone? And I'm just wondering whether some of the marginalised groups that we deal with and people that we work with in Westgate Ward and Ipswich, there might be kind of addiction problems. There might be kind of loneliness and isolation problems. And actually, we all know that digital use, there's a kind of like you might have like an addiction of device in your pocket if you're that way inclined. So I'm just wondering, are there things, should this be for everyone? And actually, what might some of the consequences be for encouraging people to use screens and it being a gateway into problems? So I'm just thinking.
Absolutely. And I mean, what we're not obviously what we're not about is using the words encouraging people to use screens. You know, that's not what this is about. What it's about is identifying that lots of our public services, and we are part of that, are moving into that digital first space. And what we don't want to do is disadvantage our populations in doing that. So obviously, you know, I sit across other projects, including the Suffolk Information Partnership and Warm Handover. So we are building a suite of interventions that will mean that people who don't want to be online can still access those services. We're working with our partners to ensure that in their moves to take their services into that online space, that they are not disadvantaging any of their users. But, you know, we have to acknowledge that there is that move from all of it. You know, I've been working with the police recently. There is a move from all of our public services into that online space, and we can't, you know, we have to acknowledge that we don't want to be leaving our populations behind. So no, it's absolutely, you know, the aim is not to make everybody buy a smartphone. You know, it's about are we moving into that space without leaving people behind, and are we putting in safeguards? Are we doing it safely? You know, my mum doesn't want to go online because she doesn't want to be scammed. That is part of it. You know, how do we work with our training standards partners, for example, to, you know, to make people aware of this safety and security, and addiction is part of that. You know, it's not going to be for everyone, we're aware of that, but what we do want to do is make sure that we're bringing the people who need to come with us, who want to come with us, who will benefit from coming with us, that they can come with us.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think to your point about the neurodivergence, I have ADHD, and my brother lives with autism. So that's kind of really varied as well, because he lives within the digital world, and I'm trying to escape it. So I think our brains are very complex and work in very different ways. But yeah, I think that's a fair point. And I think the cultural, because there's different cultural resistances as well.
Yeah.
So there's lots of things which we're seeing, which, you know, I think this is an interesting project. I just wanted your thoughts on the downsides, but I think that was helpful. Thank you, Nicola.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, and although it's not on there, obviously taking people into that space safely would also be something that we would want to support through the fund. And you know, and it is part of my role. So it's really interesting to meet people who are working in this space. So do please, I'll pop my email address in the chat, and it would be great, you know, for those of you working across that space to get in touch with me just around your projects generally, and how we, you know, even if the fund is not for you, how we can look at bringing you into the network or supporting you in some other way. That would be a really positive outcome for me.
Okay, great. Thank you, Nicola.
Thank you. Jess, are there any other questions in the chat? Because
yes,
I have kind of rather taken my eye off of it.
There are. A question from Andrew about funding a community digital content, i.e. a community website, as a tool for digital engagement. He's asking if that was appropriate project for the fund.
I mean, I think we'd have to evidence outcomes. Digital content is an area that, you know, we would have to see how it reached the people, because what we don't want to do is develop more digital content without having the inclusion behind it. Yeah, so again, that might be something that I have put my email in the chat. You know, if you wanted to discuss with me around some of the other work that we're doing, we could look at. I would be cautious to be funding more digital content without the support to bring people kind of built in behind that.
Great, thank you. Andrew has sent me some details which I can link you both up. Janet has asked on the chat that they work with a high proportion of older people unmotivated to get involved in the digital world. They would really like some guidance and perhaps some best practice on how to structure a project. Do we have anything we can share?
Can I just say, Janet, do you want to email me, because I'm doing quite a lot of work around that kind of thing, and I can share some examples and best practice and ideas with you. So that would be great.
And Richard says, are we working on a per capita funding level rather than an overall grant figure?
Paul's shaking his head. And I would agree. No, it's about impact. It's about reaching people. There is no real restriction. Paul, can you just kind of clarify it around like things like core costs and capital costs, all of that? That's all a bit too funding-y for me. I'm much more digital inclusion. Can you just maybe confirm that kind of thing?
Yeah, I think you mentioned it before. The key thing here is to make sure that people are really clear about what they need the funding for, and it is very much looking at what the outcomes are and how they, you know, the thing I think Jess said, you know, is kind of read the guidance and read it again. Make sure you're really clear about what the funder is looking to fund, i.e. Suffolk County Council and the foundation. And I think also I'd really recommend going back through the slides, Nicola's slides again, because that gives a good indication. I think most groups are really good at identifying what their beneficiaries need. One of the key things I often see funding applications fall down on is they don't always make the kind of clear link to meet the needs of the funder. And that's a really important thing. So I just say that, you know, that's why it's useful reviewing it. But as long as costs are really clear, you know, if you're going to include something around some form of full cost recovery around some of the costs for your existing organisation that you're going to need to apportion to this project, then make it clear in your costings as to what you're applying for the funding for. I think it's really important. And people were mentioning about, you know, kind of how we were going to measure outcomes and so on. I think we've tried to be kind of a bit sort of flexible on that, because what you don't want to do is stipulate to people you need to demonstrate it this way, because I know it's a real pain for a lot of voluntary organisations that when they're asked to demonstrate outcomes in a certain way, it's far better if you can say to people, this is what this is the need, this is what success would look like. You demonstrate to us how you can achieve that, how you're going to achieve that, and how you're going to measure it, because I think that's the most important thing, because you know your client groups.
I think Paul's right. I mean, it was really important to us that we're not too restrictive, that we're as flexible as possible, that it's about impact, it's about need, it's about sustainability, and we're really keen that we move towards that method of funding with this. So yeah, the outcomes, we do have a bit more information about outcomes, Jess, don't we? And I don't know if that's something that we could put as a little example in the fund specification document on somewhere on the website. I mean, I'm sure it'll be on the application form, but yeah, I mean, we're just really interested to hear about what's going on and what we can support.
Yeah, great, thank you. A couple more questions before we finish, and what we will do is collate these questions and share them as a Q&A document, and perhaps put them on our website just for people that weren't able to make it today, or if you would like to look back. Caro was asking, have we a breakdown of the age ranges for those unable to fully access the labour market, and in fact all of the excluded groups? So is that something that we have, Nicola?
So it's not something that our knowledge, intelligence and evidence team have put together for us. Obviously, our heat map was around the broader, bigger indicators. It is, you know, if it was something that people were really keen on finding out about, I know that our skills team and our CYP team have information around that kind of thing. But it's not something that necessarily we would want to see evidence of in applications for the fund. It's much more around, you know, in ensuring that the people that you're working with fall into one of those categories, you know, because we're aware that digital exclusion impacts across all age groups. It impacts across young people in terms of not having the right device. You know, it impacts across older people in terms of, you know, falling into the lower income categories or lower skill categories. It falls into the older, you know, residents categories because of, you know, motivation, fear, lack of skill, lack of, you know, security online. So there are a variety of different impacts. Hopefully you can tell that I've done quite a lot of work with partners around this. So really for me, it's about seeing the evidence, you know, we'll be working with our local partners on the funding applications, you know, that have real expertise on this. So I wouldn't say that we would need to see a breakdown of age groups across any particularly excluded group. We just need to know that you're working with the people that we want to reach.
Thank you, Nicola. Question from Sally from Citizens Advice. They have a number of older people who are unable to access information and forms online. Would it be viable for us to apply for a grant for an advisor to be able to help people presenting to us with this need?
Yeah, I mean, again, as staff costs. And fund staff costs. I mean, it is something, Paul, that we've talked about, isn't it? That there aren't any restrictions on that kind of thing. I think what we would be keen to see is that you'd look to other options first. So, you know, we already train up digital champions locally. They are accessible, you know, for our populations. We have got licenses available to, you know, upskill people who are already working with people around that. If it was going to be a staff cost, you know, I think that we would have to see significant additional outcomes coming out of that, and that it wasn't part of the role of the organisation already. So again, you know, Sally, if you wanted to have a chat about it, because, you know, we work quite closely with Citizens Advice, you know, do give me an email and we can take this out of, you know, offline. But yeah, it's not an exclusion, but I think, you know, if we were funding a particular role, we would have to see significant additional outputs from it. Can I bring Paul in, Jess?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, just really quickly on that, I think, you know, it's a case of really kind of looking at the kind of the key focus areas. So, you know, is it helping around digital skills provision? Is it providing better access to digital devices? And is it providing kind of low cost or affordable connectivity? And I think they're the key things when you're looking at those, is to say, will the project kind of link into one of those kind of key areas of focus? So I'm not quite sure about how that lines up on that, but that might be a wider discussion maybe to have with you know, kind of with Nicola on that.
Thanks, Paul. And lastly, we have a question about supporting migrants using teaching use of online services to obtain documents and services in collaboration with consultees, consulates, sorry, to avoid
put yes.
Yeah. Oh, okay, sorry.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Yeah. The answer is yes.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, absolutely. Where I said, you know, we've got that mix of supporting, you know, we're aware that residents with English as second language needs are part of our target group as well. It wasn't specifically listed, but yeah, you know, anything that has the mix of teaching, of interacting, of having a sustainable, you know, impact with people. Yeah, absolutely.
Brilliant. Well, if nobody else has any further questions, we will end the call here. But thank you so much to everybody for taking part today, for joining us. Please visit our website tomorrow, where you'll be able to access more details about the fund and the expression of interest form. And if you have any questions, please do contact myself or Nicola, and we'll be happy to help.
Very excited to start this. Yeah, lovely. Thanks so much.
Thanks
very much.
Bye.
Bye.